December hits and suddenly all of those deer that you're seeing throughout all of November vanish. Your trail cams go quiet, those evening sits start to feel empty, and a property that was full of life during the rut turns into a ghost town almost overnight. Most hunters don't think much into it and just chalk it up to the winter months. They might assume that their trail cameras are acting up because of the cold weather, or they just think that the deer moved on. But that's not the full story here. In December, deer movement doesn't disappear, it just condenses. It tightens up around these very specific areas that meet their survival needs better than anywhere else can offer. The properties that match those needs become absolute deer magnets, and the ones that don't get abandoned fast. So in this video, I'm going to break down the real reasons why deer abandon a property in the month of December, and more importantly, I'm going to look at the 3 core needs that decide where exactly these deer are going to spend the rest of hunting season. By the end, you're going to know exactly why these deer are leaving your property, how to identify what piece of the puzzle your property is missing, and what you can start doing to turn your land into a reliable late season place year after year. And by the way, I'm Greg Kazmierski. I help landowners design and improve their whitetail habitats. I help hunters in the state of Ohio buy and sell hunting land, and I'm working on building a community of growth-minded whitetail hunters who are looking to take their strategies and success to the next level. So let's dive in. By the time December rolls around, deer are worn down from the rut and the steadily increasing hunting pressure that they've experienced for the last few months. They're not out there cruising around all day like they were in November. Their priorities shift, and so does their movement. And if you have a property that doesn't line up with their core needs this time of the year, the deer don't gradually disappear. They're going to leave your property almost overnight, even if it was full of activity just a few weeks earlier. And I really believe this is where most hunters misunderstand what's actually happening out there, because when deer bail in the month of December, it almost always comes down to 3 reasons. Number 1, that property lacks high quality late season food. Early in the season, food is everywhere. You have things like ag fields, green browse, soft mass, all over the place. But once the winter hits, deer need calories fast. They start gravitating towards the best remaining food, and if your property doesn't have that, they're just not going to stick around. Number 2, the property doesn't offer high quality cover. In October, deer can bed almost anywhere and feel safe. But as the leaves start to drop and the lower vegetation begins to die off, most properties are going to lose upwards of 80 to 90% of their bedding security. Deer are instinctively going to relocate to the thickest, safest cover that they can find, and that may not be on your property. Number 3, the property's been pressured for months. In the early season, oftentimes you can get away with some sloppy access, maybe bumping a few deer here or there, but in the late season, that's absolutely something you can't do. If the deer on your property or in the area have been hunted hard and they catch you walking that same entry trail they've patterned since the early parts of October, they're going to abandon that area very quickly. And the end result, the deer aren't going to gradually drift away from your property. They're going to immediately shift to where they're not being bothered. But the good news is, once you can understand why exactly this shift happens, you can make the changes to your property that are going to flip it from a deer desert to a deer magnet in December year after year. So from here, we're going to go ahead and break down exactly what high quality late season food and cover look like, and how exactly to build low pressure access that keeps deer living and daylighting on your property. If you can get these 3 areas right, December is going to stop feeling like the end of a hunting season and start feeling like your best opportunity. So let's go ahead and start with that first core need, the food. Now, when it comes to December deer movement, food isn't just important, it's honestly the center of their entire world. After the rut, bucks are calorie depleted from chasing the does around. Those does that have been chased around are looking to build up that energy store to get through the winter, and those yearlings are just looking for that consistent nutrition in order to survive the cold. So when the winter does hit with the cold weather, the deer are going to stop drifting across the landscape like they were early in the season, and they're going to start locking on to the best remaining food source within their home range. And this is really where most properties fall apart in December. They do still have some food, but it's not the kind of food that deer are willing to bet their survival on. Late season food is completely different from early season food. Early fall is loaded with options. You have green browse, you have these annual weeds, you have your ag fields and edge vegetation. Deer can nibble their way to a full belly almost anywhere. But by December, most of that early season food is gone, dead, buried, or it's just simply not palatable for the deer anymore. So when you're trying to understand why deer aren't feeding on your property in December, it really boils down to 2 principles. 1, high calorie food is king. In December, the deer aren't going to be looking for variety, they're going to be looking for those calories. That means things like standing soybeans and corn out in the fields, brassicas and grain blends in your food plots, and even those remaining acorns in the big timber settings. If it doesn't deliver energy fast, deer just won't rely on it. Number 2, it has to last and it has to feel safe. A great food source doesn't matter in the month of December if it gets wiped out by the deer by Thanksgiving, if it's too small to support your deer density, and if the deer feel pressured every time they step into it. Plain and simple, if the food runs out, the deer are going to move on, and if they don't feel safe using it in the daylight, they're going to feed at night. That's just the reality. So the question really becomes, is your property offering the best high calorie, low pressure food in the area, or is somebody else's? Because if you don't have that top tier food source, the deer aren't leaving because the habitat's bad, they're leaving because their survival is non-negotiable. But the good news is late season food is the easiest of these 3 core needs to fix. Food plots that have the right winter mixes and improving that natural browse can turn this deer desert into a kind of feeding hub that's going to center the entire late season around the majority of the deer activity in your area. Now, when it comes to December, food might be what pulls the deer in, but that cover is going to decide whether or not they stay. Without it, the deer aren't going to spend meaningful daylight hours on your property, no matter how good your food plots look. Because in December, high quality bedding cover becomes one of the most limited resources in the whitetail world. In the earlier months like October, deer can bed almost anywhere. You have the leaf covered timber, brushy edges, this thick understory, and early season grasses and weeds exploding with cover. Almost everything still has structure and everything still provides that concealment. But once November ends and it starts to get really cold out there, maybe even mix in a heavy snowfall, most properties are going to lose 80 to 90% of their cover seemingly overnight. The leaves drop off of the trees, causing that lower level vegetation to collapse. Many of the weeds and forbs begin to die off, and that frost mats everything down flat. And suddenly there's only a few pockets on the entire landscape that still offer true daylight security. And this is really that piece where most hunters completely misread December movement. They see fewer deer and assume that food is the only problem, but in reality, deer have nowhere safe to lay down during daylight hours. Now, the late season bedding cover that deer actually use has 3 common characteristics. Number 1, it has to be thick. And now when I'm talking thick, I mean disappear before your eyes thick. If you can see hundreds of yards in every direction through your timber, it may look very nice, but it's not December deer bedding. Deer want to vanish the moment they step into that cover. Number 2, it has to block the wind. Imagine if you had to sleep outside in December. You're not choosing a spot where that cold wind is going to continuously slice through. That's why the best late season bedding shows up in things like switchgrass, regenerating timber cuts, cedar thickets, and even old fields that have this real winter structure. These spots are warm, insulated, and visually secure. And number 3, it has to be close to food. In December, deer are going to tighten that home range and conserve every calorie that they can. If your bedding is too far away from that high quality food source, they're going to shift closer, and sometimes that shift is straight off of your property. This is why you can see deer pile into one small property and completely vacate everything around it. The winning properties in December simply have this thick, wind-breaking bedding cover that is in the right location relative to the food. So now's a really good time to ask yourself if your property still offers that thick, high-quality bedding when everything else has died back, or does it turn into this open timber and bare ground the moment that winter hits? Because the food might attract the deer, but the cover is going to be what keeps them living there and, more importantly, keep them daylighting. Now, if the food pulls the deer in and the cover keeps them comfortable, the low hunting pressure is going to be what keeps them daylighting consistently. And in December, the hunting pressure isn't just another factor, it is going to be the deciding factor if deer are moving through your property in daylight or mowing down your food plots at 1 a.m. Because when you think about it, by the time that the late season hits, these deer have been hunted, bumped, pressured, and patterned for months. They've watched the hunters walk the same access trails, they've heard that metal on metal rattling of the tree stands, and they've caught your scent on those marginal wind setups more times than you think. So even if your property still has the food and the cover, if the deer don't feel safe in daylight, they're not going to move in daylight. And there are 2 major pressure mistakes that absolutely kill daylight deer movement in December. Number 1 is predictable and insecure access routes. If you've been walking the same trail in and out of your woods since opening day and that trail isn't visually blocked by something like the terrain or screening cover, deer already have you patterned. And once a human travel route becomes associated with danger danger, deer are immediately going to shift both their bedding and their travel patterns. The deer aren't guessing. They know exactly where hunters are coming from, and they are going to avoid that area like the plague. Number 2, hunting too much and hunting at the wrong time. In December, the deer aren't going to be roaming like they did in early November. They're going to stick tight to the bedding, tight to the food, and extremely conservative with their daylight movement. So if you sit a late season stand one too many times, or you continuously get down right as they're about to pass through an area, it's only going to take 1 or 2 encounters before they completely shift their movement patterns. And that's why for me, late season whitetail hunting is all about timing, not necessarily volume. A stand that gets hunted too often or on the wrong day is dead. So here's the bottom line. If you have a stand location that can't be accessed cleanly without being seen, heard, or smelled, leave it alone and let certain outside factors dictate when you hunt your best late season spots, like a sharp temp drop or maybe even a big snowstorm. Those are going to be the moments that deer push just early enough for that daylight opportunity. Now to wrap this up, let's pull everything together, that food, that cover, and that low hunting pressure, and use it all to rebuild a December hunting property that deer don't just consistently live on, but they move through in daylight. And here's an important note that most hunters overlook. You do not need hundreds of acres to build a late season whitetail powerhouse. You just need the right components in the right places all working together. So here's exactly what that looks like in practice. Number 1, start with the food source. Find the spot on your property where you can introduce a winter reliable food source and make sure that it's a place you can access without blowing deer out of the bedding area. Focus on introducing food that is high calorie, predictable, and large enough to support the deer density that you have. When the deer trust that a food source is still going to be there tomorrow and then the day after, they will naturally shift their bedding closer to that food source. That is the foundation of every successful late season property. Number 2, build thick insulated bedding within a couple hundred yards of that food source. This exact thing is going to be what eliminates random wandering and creates a tight, huntable bed to food pattern. That means depending on your property, you're going to need to introduce things like switchgrass pockets, timber regeneration cuts, cedar thermal cover, or maybe even field structure that is going to survive that frost. If the deer can disappear into it, stay warm, and stay hidden from any of that hunting pressure, that's going to be high quality December bedding. And number 3, finish with hunter access that is quiet, clean, and keeps your scent blowing away from the deer. If you can't get into your stand unseen, unheard, and you're upwind of the deer, your late season strategy is going to fall apart no matter how good your food and bedding are. So build hunter access that stays on the downwind side of bedding and hidden by the terrain or screening cover. Then hunt those best stands only when the weather pushes movement up earlier. Temp drops, a snowstorm, or that first cold snap after warm weather. That is going to be when late season deer finally move early enough to kill. When all 3 of these pieces work together, deer don't just visit your property in December. They live on it, they bed on it, they feed on it, and they're going to be moving during daylight. And when you can time your hunts right, your late season odds are going to skyrocket. And if you're watching this and thinking that your food isn't right, you don't have that high quality late season cover, you don't have the right access routes to get into your stand locations, but you have no idea how to fix it, that is exactly how I help landowners. Every property is different. The terrain, the hunting pressure, the habitat quality, the deer density, these are all going to shape how you build the December plan that will actually work. So if you're somebody that might want help designing a late season property that the deer are going to stay on, not just pass through, I would be more than happy to work with you one-on-one and build a full habitat plan that's tailored around your land. You can find the link to my consulting services in the description down below. Thank you all for sticking through this one, and remember that late season doesn't have to feel dead. On the right property, it can offer some of the most predictable hunting. When you get your food right, you get your cover right, and you get your access right, December is going to become a completely different ballgame. So good luck out there, and I'll see you guys in the next video.